Hello and welcome to F.E.A.S.T's webinar on nurturing your loved ones through the holiday season. Our speaker today is going to be Therese Waterhous, who is a dietitian. She is actually located in Oregon in the United States. So let's kind of get moving. Let me do some housekeeping items here. First of all, for F.E.A.S.T, thank you. We're here for you because we've been there, including Therese, and she's going to tell you a little bit about herself in just a second. But thank you for joining us today. So if you don't mind, please stay muted with the camera off during the presentation. And if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat box and we will take care of them in the Q&A portion of the webinar. And at this moment, I am actually going to turn the webinar over to Therese to let her introduce herself and then move on into her presentation. Therese?
Thank you, Dawn, and thank you, F.E.A.S.T, for inviting me to do this webinar. As Dawn mentioned, I am a dietitian. I'm also a certified eating disorder specialist and a fellow of the Academy for Eating Disorders. I've had the great privilege of being trained and presenting shoulder to shoulder with and working on committees with so many experts in the field. So I'm thankful for all of that. Dawn also mentioned that I am a person with lived experience. We have a child who became sick with anorexia nervosa about 20 years ago. Thankfully, she is fully recovered, doing well, eating on her own, of course. So, and at the time, 20 years ago really almost feels like the dark ages in some respects. It was right before F.E.A.S.T was launched. I was part of the founding board of F.E.A.S.T, and that collection of other parents was so helpful to me. It was also the time when Doctors Locke and LaGrange were just initiating the clinical trials on family-based treatment in the United States, having imported a lot of the original knowledge from the Maudsley Hospital. So we also benefited from that. So it was a good time. I've seen so many changes in the eating disorder field, and especially the empowerment of more and more parents and seeing more and more of us help each other. Okay, so this presentation is about the holidays and what they bring to the table, and really talking about some of the challenges for us as parents and family members caring for somebody with an eating disorder. So first, a little bit of recognition here. One is there are quite a few winter holidays. And I want to say this presentation is to honor families around the world as they celebrate all the various winter holidays. There are many in different cultures, different countries. I am by no means an expert on all the various winter holidays, but I do know they exist. So this is to honor all winter holidays. Excuse me. There are also a lot of family types as well. I want to recognize all types of families, families being a collection of people who perhaps live together, work together, consider one another family. So I want to recognize all the types of families who are doing this work to support a person as they move through recovery from an eating disorder, and families working towards improving the health and well-being of any of their members. All forms of illnesses do place families in different kinds of situations. Eating disorders still have a stigma associated with them, and that makes things a little different. They're less well understood, which places an added burden often on families as they support a person in a world that does not understand them or these types of disorders. Not that something like cancer is easier, but most people profess to have a greater understanding of some of the cancers than they do eating disorders. And that degree of understanding is important, and it can affect us as family members. And then I want to acknowledge there are a lot of different forms of treatment. At F.E.A.S.T, we promote family empowerment and family-based treatment. That said, in different parts of the world, other forms of treatment might be available and effective. So this presentation is for all families. So first, when we're thinking about a different time of year, we're thinking about the holidays and how they alter our schedules, and we're caring for a person with an illness, with an eating disorder. The first thing we have to do as caregivers is evaluate that person. Who are they? Where are they in their journey towards recovery? Are they perhaps in the hospital for medical stabilization? Are they in residential treatment or an intensive outpatient or partial hospitalization program? Are they home with you? Where are they in their ability to eat independently and without fear? Are they more independent with food, less independent? Do they need more of your support? So again, really thinking about this, sometimes crafting that timeline with a treatment team, if you have one. Where are they in that road towards independent, less fearful, less concerning eating? And then who is in their corner? You, their treatment team. If they're at a treatment center, um, they should be receiving lots of support, and you should be receiving lots of support. And then as we go through this discussion, we have to think about, at this time, as we go through holidays, what can't change for our person and what can change. So first, let's do an inventory of ourselves. I think before we start to think about our person moving towards recovery and what can change or not change for them, we have to be honest and think about what the holidays mean to us. So what do we love most about the holidays? Be honest here, kind of create a list for yourself. It's often helpful to place what we love about the holidays into categories, such as decorating, holiday food making and eating, gathering with others, shopping, traveling, having time off, watching old movies. And they don't have to be old movies. You can watch new movies too. Having unorganized time, religious experiences and rituals, dressing up, festive clothing, singing, festive lights, smells of the holidays, gift giving and receiving. And then think about, there may be other categories for you. So think about, in each of these categories, are there things that are extremely meaningful to you or to your family or to your person that you're caring for? Because those extremely meaningful things that exist in a category lead to our expectations. So think about what exists in those categories in terms of specific activities, such as holiday food making. Maybe you have a tradition of gathering with lots of family members and making Christmas cookies or some other type of holiday food. Or maybe your family has a tradition of getting up early on the eve of a special holiday and eating some certain kind of food. So think about those. You might not have activities in some categories, such as singing, but look at and list out what matters to you in the various categories. What matters to you? What matters to others in your family? What are their expectations? What matters to the person in recovery? Then, in which categories will there be the most challenges for our loved one with an eating disorder? For example, some of the food-centered activities are often quite challenging for a person. Traveling can be quite challenging. Anything that disrupts the current schedule, especially if the person is early um, in their recovery or say just out of residential treatment, they might be on a certain type of schedule. So things that disrupt schedules can be challenging. And then what categories offer things to do that are completely safe? Maybe watching movies or singing feels completely safe. So again, these are things to, if you have a treatment team, if you're at a treatment center, discuss with those team members, have them help you probe your loved person to see what matters to them and what is challenging to them. And then widening the scope concerning expectations. So think about expectations that you have for yourself, what expectations exist for your family, for the person with an eating disorder, and then also for your community or for society. A lot of holidays revolve around community and societal or cultural expectations. So think about those. Who might you need to talk to in order to help them adjust their expectations, if expectations exist? Then go back to thinking about your person with an eating disorder and think about what they can tolerate given their stage of recovery. So we realize that eating disorders are spectral in nature. They range from somewhat mild to extremely severe. They almost always coexist with other types of mental disorders and sometimes physical issues. So they almost always coexist with anxiety, sometimes obsessive compulsive disorders, sometimes other types of mood disorders. So just thinking about where your person is, are they able to be flexible yet or not? Um, so we really have to zone in on their stage of recovery and then adjust our expectations accordingly. And again, just to repeat that message, depending on where a person is in recovery, they may or may not be able to tolerate activities in those various categories. Think about what the categories you love entail as far as doing things. What does gathering with others entail? Is it a small gathering, a large gathering? If you're in a gathering that involves meals and your person is on a meal plan, can you make the meal plan still happen? Can you keep your person on a schedule if they're eating, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a couple of snacks on a schedule? Can you stick to the schedule? What would traveling involve? Sometimes traveling means, traveling can be disruptive of schedules. If you're spending a long time on a train or a plane, again, can you keep meals consistent? Would you be traveling and gathering with people who would understand an eating disorder? Sometimes large groups of people can be rather unnerving to a person early in the stages of recovery. So again, if you're working with a treatment team or an individual clinician, ask for their help and advice so you can plan ahead and really zone in on what your person with an eating disorder can do at this stage. So tricky situations, and these are just things that I've heard over and over and over from families, from people with eating disorders. Before this talk, I went to quite a few organizations' web pages to see what they suggested as far as making it through the holidays. And so some of these are an amalgam of what they said can be tough activities, but these are some of the common things I've heard. So sudden changes in plans. We know, for example, that people with restrictive eating, sometimes set shifting is very difficult for them. They like to know ahead of time what's going to happen. And a sudden change in plans can set them up really for higher anxiety and panic. And that's just how their brain works. their brain is working overtime to keep them safe. So when they're in our care, we have to help them feel safe. And so sudden changes in plans can really work against the temperament of a person with a restrictive eating disorder. Now, we do hope as they progress through recovery, they learn how to work with their brain that's working so hard to keep them safe. As they move into adulthood and mature further, they're better able often to do that. Winging it as far as meals. This is also kind of a sudden shift in plans, but not having plans ahead of time for what food you can access, where you will prepare the food, where the person will eat the food. Maybe they're still at a stage where they really would prefer to eat alone or just with you as their person monitoring meals. So, but for certain, don't have lack of planning when it comes to meals. So winging it as far as meals can be, excuse me, a real landmine. Unstructured time, which often happens during the holidays. Some people love it, some people don't. They'll just sit and kind of ruminate and be thinking ahead, perhaps be overburdened with eating disorder thoughts. So for some people, having more structured time is helpful. Being in large groups can be very difficult for some people, especially younger people, people early in their eating disorders. You know, I don't expect a 12 or 13-year-old to be able to explain their illness to another person. Oftentimes they feel very self-conscious, they feel the stigma from others. So again, really, we have to know who's going to be in a large group, and we have to know the comfort level of our loved one with an eating disorder as far as being in a large group. And of course, hearing diet talk, food judgments, fat phobia, which the holidays are often replete with. Often, at least in the United States, there are commercials, media messages. In fact, I was driving down the street a couple of weeks ago. It was right before Thanksgiving here, and there was a sign in front of a flower shop. Okay, this is just a flower shop. And the sign said, "Flowers add sweetness without adding extra calories." Ugh. You know, really, did you have to ruin the whole flower shop experience? Um, I thought. Now, some people, if you aren't familiar with eating disorder thinking, you might not think anything of it. You might even think that's a cute saying. If you are familiar with how eating disorders can alter the thinking of people and introduce extra fear, you would cringe at that sign. And then having people not understanding an eating disorder. So think of large gatherings. People might not understand what's going on. Maybe they were aware that your child or loved one had gone to treatment or was undergoing outpatient treatment. They're very curious. Oftentimes people are extremely curious about eating disorders. They don't understand them. They sort of start probing, and that can be a very uncomfortable situation. And then, of course, the holidays bring different foods, different eating times, lack of structure around meals, depending on where your person is in their journey to recovery. Keeping them safe, keeping them feeling less panicked means having structure around meals, keeping the eating times, and keeping them with food that they are currently comfortable with. This doesn't mean we can't change things up, but again, it depends on where your person is. The holidays are not a time for a sudden or large change in eating, I would say. And then sometimes there's expectations that the person be flexible just for the holiday, just go along with whatever's happening. Again, this may or may not be possible for your person, depending on where they are in recovery. Being flexible, some people are great with that. If they're further along in recovery, they may be able to do that. If they're older, they may be able to do that. But don't just suddenly in your own head think, oh, come on, it's the holidays, they can be flexible, and have that be a huge change for them. So again, change needs to happen slowly but surely along eating disorder recovery. Big, huge jumps. So if being flexible involves a big, huge jump, I would suggest not doing that. Okay, so we've just talked about what may or may not be possible for your person with an eating disorder. We've talked about expectations. Some of what you love about the holidays, maybe you can't do. Maybe your family has always gone on a wonderful week-long ski trip or something during the holidays. Maybe your loved one isn't yet cleared to do exercise. So maybe you have to skip the ski trip. Maybe your family likes to get up early on a holiday morning and have cookies for breakfast. Nothing wrong with that. It can be a tradition, but for your person with an eating disorder, that may be too much to bear. They may still need their kind of standard food that they've gotten used to, whether it's part of a meal plan or a treatment plan from a treatment center. I know in manualized family-based treatment, parents make the decisions about food. You know, they are tasked with, you decide, you use your historical knowledge of your child and, decide what they eat. And again, if you're at that place and if your loved one is doing good with that, do that. But again, things may have to change. Things may look different for this holiday season and maybe for a few more in the future. With that in mind, give yourself space to grieve. Grieve what you can't do right now. Look at what your loved one can do and what they can't do, and then give yourself the time and space to really let go of some of those traditions. Allow yourself to grieve what feels like a loss of something you love, and that's normal. It's normal to feel a sense of loss. Know that these can come back to you one day. Give room for family members to express themselves and how they may feel a loss. So yes, this takes a little bit of advance planning. So give yourself space to grieve, but then focus on what you're achieving. Take a moment to sit and relax and realize you are helping a person recover from a really difficult place. Okay? Give yourself a pat on the back, a high five. You're doing this, and appreciate yourself for doing it. Okay? I can't emphasize this enough. Allow yourself space to grieve if you need to, but then pick yourself up and give yourself that pat on the back. And then also in terms of self-care, which is important for us as caregivers. So eating disorders care, like care given for other illnesses, does take time. Caring for somebody with an illness does change our schedules, and the holidays change our schedules too. We as family can't do everything, so prioritize, pick the important things. Care for an illness needs to come before attending to every single holiday thing you've done in the past. So be gentle on yourself and give yourself a break. Give yourself extra time. Now let's go back to talking about what can't change. So what can't change for your person with an eating disorder? Meal plans, if you're using one, can't change. We can't do sudden changes like, oh, we're having this holiday meal. Excuse me. It may be really different from how you've been eating, but let's just go with the flow. I would suggest not doing that. That's pretty anxiety provoking. Now, if your loved one is at a place where they are starting to have some food challenges, they're becoming more independent with serving themselves. You've seen evidence of that at home under normal circumstances. If you feel like You can allow some flexibility as a parent. Do it. Plan with your treatment team if you have one to, where are they? Could we introduce some food challenges? But be careful. So meal plans can't change suddenly. Appointments that are necessary can't change. The stage of recovery can't change or be rushed. Again, I'm going back to this theme of if we suddenly think we can change the stage of recovery, we will most likely be introducing anxiety. Necessary routines can't change. If the person is in the hospital or a treatment center, they won't be expected to take part in many holiday gatherings. Yet, as a family, you can still think about how to support them. And then overall support can't change. If you've been highly involved at home, preparing meals, serving meals, monitoring meals, making sure that they're eating, supporting them after meals, we can't suddenly change that up. So again, the operative word is suddenly. So sudden anything tends to not work. So for people with an eating disorder, feeling safe is a priority. Now let's talk more about those holiday gatherings, which involve friends and family. How well do you know your family? Who in your family will accept some eating disorder education from you? You're becoming an expert, or you are an expert. So will they accept some suggestions from you, some education? Who in your family will never change? We all may have experienced friends and family who just can't stop talking, excuse me, about how they went to the gym that morning and worked out for 2 hours so they could eat this big holiday meal, or people who will never stop talking about their current diet. Those are people who maybe we should consider not including in our holiday gatherings. Does your extended family understand eating disorders? And this is for you to evaluate. Do they understand it? Will their lack of understanding lead to some potentially anxiety-provoking situations? And sometimes, we can't avoid it. Some triggers happen, and part of recovery certainly does involve the person understanding what is triggering to them, what is uncomfortable for them, and learning to help themselves relax. And again, this is a more advanced stage of recovery. So do evaluate your family, your friends, people you might gather with. How understanding are they of eating disorders? And how does their understanding or lack thereof, how could that affect your person at this time? Common errors in thinking that I think we've all encountered, that a person with an eating disorder has to be really thin or skeletal. There are many, many people diagnosed with what is called atypical anorexia nervosa, even though I don't think of it as atypical, but people can be in any type of body, any age, and have an eating disorder. People still think often that an eating disorder is a choice, and we know that that's not true. People fail to understand that fear and anxiety are very much part of eating disorders. And people often don't quite get that diet talk and moralizing food really isn't okay. It's not okay for any of us. I think it does damage and causes stress to all people. It's especially toxic to people with an eating disorder. So some of that diet and fat phobic talk, while we're on the subject, I thought I'd put up a few examples. Even something that seems innocuous, like finishing a meal and saying, "Oh, I'm so stuffed." That can not sound good to somebody with an eating disorder. Words like, "I'll need to work this off, I'm cheating," or the constant supposed compliment, "You look so fit, have you lost weight?" Never mind why a person has lost weight, perhaps they're grieving, Perhaps they've had a recent illness, a cancer. There's all kinds of reasons people lose appetite and can lose weight. And so giving a compliment really, I think, is inappropriate. And then people just outright talking about dieting. I'm ketogenic, I'm doing intermittent fasting. Or this common one, you don't look like you have an eating disorder. Again, thinking that there's just a certain body type that looks like it has an eating disorder. And this is one of the worst, but I still hear it tossed out. I wish I could get an eating disorder coming from somebody who's really saying, I want to lose weight. I mean, that's just plain yucky. Or I worked out this morning so I could eat a lot tonight. Again, not good. Nobody has to work to earn the right to eat. And then just constantly making comments about food quality, like this is really high calorie food. Okay, so those are just examples of talk that can happen in large gatherings. And again, your person in recovery may be at a place where they can buffet that. Some of the older teenagers, young adults, actually become quite activist. And so when they start to hear that, they may be able to step up to the plate and say, hey, wait a minute. Can you not speak that way? You know, they might be ready to be challenging. So, so be it, but you and your treatment team have to kind of decide, is that a conversation ready to happen? So if you're in any kind of holiday situation and you become concerned, if you're seeing what you think are eating disorder behaviors pop up, wait to have a private conversation. And I'm sure you know this, but we don't bring up concerns in a large group or at the actual meal unless you're having a meal just one-on-one with your person. Plan ahead for unexpected spikes in anxiety and have an exit plan. So think ahead, you know, what if we just need to exit stage left? How will we do that? Where can we access a safe space? Plan ahead with the treatment team if you have one. They can help identify foods that might be different, but that can still fit within a meal plan. They can help substitute foods if that's appropriate. And then traveling, once again, to do it or not. How do you make it safe? How do you continue with support, routines, meal plans, if that's what you're using at this stage of recovery? And then holiday foods. So many different holidays do involve different kinds of food rituals, special meals. The single best thing for a person in recovery from an eating disorder or in their journey towards recovery is to keep things the same at this point in time, regardless of where they are in recovery, and keep them feeling safe. So I included this link to a blog. It was from the Association for Size Diversity in Health. And this blog was written by a therapist. She was writing about eating disorders as an active trauma, little bit different take. It was a really, really good article. And I was so taken with the article, I actually contacted the therapist and thanked her for writing it and told her I was going to pass it on to others. So here it is for you, but I think it really speaks. I kind of like framing eating disorders as an active trauma because the cornerstone of trauma-based care, trauma-informed care, is safety. When people have persistent trauma, PTSD, their brain is telling them that things aren't safe. They have to relearn strategies to work with themselves, to calm themselves down. So somebody recovering from an eating disorder, they can be anywhere along this continuum where maybe they haven't learned safety yet. They still rely on you to keep them safe. So, and that's especially true for really young people, but I've had people as old as 50 who, you know, really significant, very real trauma history. And she constantly would need to be reassured. Sometimes I would stop We'd be talking about food, maybe a little bit of a food challenge. And she would start to get anxious, and I would have to remind her, tell me how you know you're safe right now, because her brain would start to work out. And, that's just the brain trying to keep a person safe after they've experienced some kind of trauma. So look at this article. I thought it was super good. And again, being safe. This might mean not going to those large gatherings where meal structure doesn't exist unless you can figure out how to make it work. Maybe you bring the person's dinner. Maybe you gather for a bit and then go home to eat. It means avoiding toxic talk and people who don't know that they engage in that type of talk. It might mean focusing more so on non-food traditions like decorating, gift giving, card making. It might mean having extra appointments with your treatment team. It may mean being in the hospital and focusing on fun activities like watching movies, making cards, doing crafts, or giving a foot massage. I know both of my kids, it's when they would really open up to me. I started giving foot massages in general, but they really liked the foot ones when they were kids, infants, toddlers, and this persisted. It was really fun as they were in middle and high school. They would have been loath to think that any of their friends knew their mommy was giving them a foot massage, but it was the one time where they would relax, maybe open up to me. So foot massages, things like that can be really grounding for somebody, very relaxing. Okay, so finally, opening up space so you can change things. That's really what a lot of this was about. Caring for somebody with any type of illness really asks us to do things differently. It won't always be different, but life does evolve. Things will continue to change. Again, be gentle on yourselves. Give yourselves a pat on the back for doing this work. Access the wonderful support at Feast. Okay, happy holidays to everybody.
So Reese, thank you so very much for that wonderful presentation. I'm going to do this really quickly, just this one slide really quickly, and then I've got some questions for you that have come in. So first of all, the only way that Feast is able to provide services to the community is through donations. We recognize that everyone going through treatment or who has someone in treatment, that their funds are often stretched beyond, but everything that we offer to the community is done so free. Anyone can use our resources. For instance, this webinar, like Reese, we have parent groups, we have Facebook groups. There's a plethora of information on our website. So if you feel that you have an opportunity to say thank you or able to donate, we really encourage you to do so and appreciate it, especially during the holidays. So Therese, if you could, and really quickly, yes, our next webinars in January is with Carolyn Black-Becker. She's talking about body image, and then the Feast of Knowledge is coming up February 26th. So keep those in mind. Those are also on the Feast website. But Therese, if you could stop sharing, I've got a couple of questions for you. So the first question is if a caregiver has more children, obviously, than the one with eating disorders in the home, or others in the home who are feeling resentment because they're not garnering the same attention, and they probably feel guilty for having that resentment as well towards that sibling or that person. How do you suggest that caregivers try to reduce that resentment and to give the attention to those people, to those siblings that they deserve, so they feel like they are receiving the same amount of attention, or that they're just as important as the person who is not doing well.
Well, and that always is kind of a tough one. You know, I remember a particular dinner that was a real battlefield for us. The person with an eating disorder was just battling both of us as parents, and our younger one looked me straight in the face and said, "Mom, this is ruining my childhood." Well, this is not a thing a parent wants to hear, but I think, of course, we continue to give attention to the child. We can validate their feelings. For one, we can say, you know, I get it. It probably seems like so and so is getting more attention than you. Um, Sometimes when people are sick, they do need more attention. If you became sick, I would give you all the attention you needed so that you could get better, because that's what I do as a parent. You know, my job as a parent is to care for you. And when people are sick, sometimes they need extra time. But let's talk about what we can do. You know, what would you like to do in order to keep the holidays special for you? Maybe we can talk about that. Make sure that some of their favorite things still happen. Maybe they can go to friends' houses and have holiday experiences with friends or relatives. It kind of depends on the age of the siblings too. So, and yeah, I just think we have to, of course, keep giving attention, and it is more for us to do, but I think also just reminding them that this is the job of parents. You know, if you had an illness, I'd be right there for you too. And sometimes giving them tasks. Maybe they can do some more of the decorating, you know, some more of the cookie cutting out or card making or singing or something.
Mhm.
So I think, of course, tending to their needs, validating their feelings, keeping some of their favorite fun activities there for them
Mhm.
are
I'm
important.
wondering if the language, the first part of the language that you used was, is that, your sibling is sick, and if you were sick, I would spend that much time to you. Does that create a fear in the parent that that child or sibling or other person might become sick just so that they can have that attention? And so, how would you deal with that fear from a parent who says, "Oh my goodness, I may have caused this because this is what I said to them"?
Well, that again, I think you have to kind of know your child, and I think is age dependent. I
Mhm.
would also maybe ask your treatment team some advice on that. But again, you know, and you could also, I mean, we can't always avoid that. I will say from experience, I have not seen that frequently, where a sibling then feigns an illness or tries to become sick. I haven't seen that very much. Of course, watch out for it. But again, you know, try to keep things that are fun for the person. And as a family, try to keep fun things. I mean, don't let the illness completely dictate your entire routine. Sometimes it can feel that way with an eating disorder. But remember, there are other things, like go back to that list of activities and categories. What else can we all do that aren't going to exacerbate eating disorder behaviors? What
Mhm.
else can we all do? And try to focus on those things. Try to focus on non-eating disorder aspects of being together.
Mhm. As a couple of other questions that we have, the your slides on taking care of yourself and giving yourself that pat on the back and the take a moment. How do you justify that when you, as a, a caregiver, when you're just like completely exhausted and you're like, there's still 10 things that have to be done today. How do you justify that to yourself?
Well, I guess my first question would be, are there really 10 things that have to be done today?
Mhm.
People drive themselves nuts during the holidays. They often drive themselves nuts. So I would say, okay, first, see if you can prioritize, see if you can delegate. Can you delegate some activities? Can you do without some of those 10 things? Um, can you ask for help? And no matter what, even if you take 15 minutes for yourself to say, to just acknowledge what you're grieving,
Mhm.
to just acknowledge yourself as a person and what you're going through, just even 15 minutes. Do you have a trusted friend, family member, spouse, somebody where maybe you make a ritual that every
Mhm.
evening after kids are in bed or something, you go for a walk, or maybe you have a friend come over and just be at the house and you do something for yourselves as a family, for yourselves as a couple, for yourself by yourself. Try to create something because we all, and try to divorce yourself from thinking you have to do everything.
Mhm.
So going back to my first question, are there really 10 things? Are there a few things you can get rid of there?
Mhm. No, thank you. That's awesome. And then with the diet and the fat phobic language, it's so prevalent in society, and it's habitual, and it's not that people do this on purpose. And yes, asking people, to be aware of what they're saying. But how do you react when someone does say something like that without realizing it? And it triggers your person. What's the best reaction?
Well, I think if it has triggered your person, the first thing is to work with your person. Find
Publicly at the
extra
table, what do you do? I
mm,
mean, everything is going to
at the
stop and
table.
they're going to be embarrassed and all of, how do you deal with that?
I would try, well, prevention first. I
Mhm.
would, try to prevent something like that from happening by not being in a situation where that could happen. That easier said than done. And if it does happen, maybe don't mention it right there at the table. That's too hot of a
Mhm.
place. It's just happened. It's too hot.
Mhm.
Afterwards, when you and your person can have a moment to escape, go for a walk, do something, sit down and process it with them. We all have to learn how to kind of do post-traumatic processing. So, if they're obviously triggered, just have them talk to you.
Mhm.
What was that? Da, 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 da. Talk about how maybe it was a ridiculous comment. Talk about how lots of people get hung up about issues with weight. Why wouldn't they? We're all pummeled with messages about weight and losing weight and this and that. And you can talk about how that's often what gets eating disorders started.
So
That's
somewhere else, and also along those lines, so what about, so you're having this conversation before with family and friends, and like you're saying, you're preparing a safe zone as much as possible. What, how do you respond as a carer to the person who says, no, I don't want to change my behavior. I just want to act normally. How would you respond? I mean, I've heard you say before that, this is a very uncomfortable conversation in general. For
mhm.
instance, the grandparents. This is really uncomfortable. So how would you suggest
Well,
responding?
number one recommendation, don't spend the holidays with those people.
Okay.
And if they ask why, be really honest. Say,
Mhm.
my child's health right now has to take priority over your need to have a big holiday celebration. My
Even if it's
child,
at your house,
huh?
even
You
if
can
it's at your
change
house.
things up. You can just not invite people to, I
Mhm.
mean, you can really change things up. And then if people see that you're serious, it's like, this is serious. Do you want to talk to me about what and why? What
Mhm.
needs to change and why it needs to change? And if you can't change, be where you are, but it may mean I can't be with you
Right now, right?
right
Mhm.
now. No offense, I get it. And I get that sometimes our reaction to fat phobic messages, is what it is.
It is.
However,
Mhm. So we have
however,
2 more questions, and they're
mhm,
somewhat related. So what about the child who, regardless of where they are in their treatment, in their journey to recovery, who does not want you to prepare the way or talk to people? How do as a parent, as a caregiver, your immediate thought is, but I can't protect you if I don't do that.
mhm. Well, I think it depends on the age of the child
Mhm.
again. So, I've had kids with anorexia nervosa who were as young as 8. I've certainly had kids with ARFID who were
Mhm.
8, 9, 10 years old, or binge eating issues, all ages. So it kind of depends on the age of the child. Sometimes you can say things to other adults and the child doesn't need to know.
Mhm.
So there's that for the very young. If they've been very explicit with you, say they're an older child, because usually super young kids, they may not say that. They may not have the presence of mind to say that, to you. Don't discuss with others, blah, blah, blah. Um, and again, we have to evaluate, where are we going? Who are we being with? But let's say as the child gets older, they're middle school, high school, transition age youth, and they've explicitly told you, okay, again, if what they're saying is, I can handle this myself. I can handle the triggers. And so again, if you have a treatment team, evaluate this as a team. You are part of the team as a parent. Evaluate this with your team. Would they be ready to handle triggering conversations? Some are, some aren't. You can respect their wishes up until you start seeing, behaviors creeping in, because eating disorders will take advantage of cracks in the rock.
Of course they do. And one final question about the patient who is further along in their treatment, and they want to, they are able to be challenged. You have worked with the treatment team, and you are at that point where you can challenge them. How would you recommend that the caregiver do that during a holiday when there are others around? How do you do that?
Well, I think it depends what challenge we're talking about, whether it's a challenge specifically with food. I wouldn't mess with schedules too much. Like, no, we're not going to do the thing where nobody eats until 4 p.m. That's not good for any eating disorder diagnosis, be it BED, ARFID, anorexia.
Mhm.
One of the hallmarks of normal eating is eating on pretty regular schedules. So it depends on what the challenge is. If it's around new foods, once again, discuss it ahead of time, plan ahead of time. If the person has a treatment team, let them talk through and kind of visualize how things will look different ahead of time.
Mhm. And not obviously people with eating disorders, a lot of the time they don't want to socialize. So um, is it a compromise where you come in and you say hello, and you spend 5 minutes, and then you walk out the door, or whatever the compromise is? So
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, that can be a challenge too. And again, planning ahead versus the sudden surprise, sudden change
Mhm.
aspect usually doesn't go well.
Right.
Thinking through if the almost every person with an eating disorder has some degree of anxiety.
Mhm.
So we want to keep anxiety low, teach them whether, and they may be at a stage where they can work with themselves to keep their anxiety low. They may not be, as in, younger kids or extremely severely affected people. And so, again, really talking through specifics with the treatment team, with the person in recovery ahead of time. What's this going to look like? What if this happens? What will we do? What will you do? How do you think it'll feel at that moment if somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh, you look great. You've gained so much weight." Or, you know, "Gosh, I heard you were at a treatment center, but I never thought of you as somebody with an eating disorder." Maybe they have atypical anorexia. It's like, practice, have some of those discussions, talk
Mhm.
about what they've heard in process group, or talk about what they've heard from friends, or what are they anticipating could happen.
Mhm.
People with many types of eating disorders have kind of this anticipatory anxiety. They tend to look forward into a situation and predict the worst.
Mhm.
So access some of that. What do they think could happen? What is the worst nightmare that they think could happen? And let's work through that.
Okay. And then one last question. Just so like you said, you prepare for the worst, you prepare for what, anything that you conceive that could happen. So how do you suggest some coping skills for the carers and um, parents as to something happening that you couldn't even conceive? I should have seen that, it's the self-blame. I could have prepared for that. Why didn't I see that? Why
Well,
didn't we
first
even
of all,
consider?
be nice to yourself. If you didn't see it coming, you didn't see it coming. That's it. Plain and simple. Once it happened, it happened. And so then retreat to a calm, safe place with
Forgive
your
yourself.
person. Huh? Yeah,
Forgive
forgive
yourself.
yourself, retreat to a calm, safe place, and start to do the work. You have to do the work of, okay, how are we going to reduce anxiety? How can we? And sometimes people will go way up here, panicking, panicking, panicking. If they've been working in therapy, maybe they can access some skills. Okay. So depending on what kinds of therapy, maybe they've been doing DBT, and
Mhm.
so, distress reduction techniques. And hopefully, um, you've also gained some knowledge of different kinds of therapy approaches to use to help reduce situations. If not, you know, parents know their child, retreat to a calm place, do some massage, do some somatic work, do whatever you've been able to access to help calm things down.
Thank you. Thank you, Therese. We really appreciate the extra time that you've spent with this. Any final words of encouragement just to end on a positive note?
Um, you know, it is hard work. It's hard work. Um, People do get better. Um, Life goes on in some way, shape, or form. And we have to sometimes access, within us, where is the calm space? Sometimes we have to ask ourselves, how do I know I'm safe? And build that little castle for yourself.
And thank yourself and appreciate for the work that you've
Mm-hmm.
been able to do and
Mm-hmm.
celebrate the positives.
Mm-hmm.
think of one positive thing a day, that positivity jar, where you just write one positive thing in and you drop it in every day. Just
Mhm.
something just to acknowledge the hard work that you've put in, and that, um, that you're doing the best you can. And that's all anybody can ask.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Well,
Therese,
thank
again,
you.
thank you so much for recording this. We really appreciate it. We wish you and your family a wonderful holiday season. And
Same to all of you, and thank you for having me.
all right, well, everybody take care, and happy holidays.
Mhm.